Welcome to the channel. I know many of you listen to these videos to relax or fall asleep, and I'm really glad you're here. Before we start today's crime stories, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't already. And if there's any crime story you'd like me to narrate for you, feel free to request it in the comment section. Now let's begin. Story 1. Stephen Sean Griffiths was born on December 24th, 1969, in Dewsbury, West Riding of Yorkshire, England. He was an only child. His parents moved the family to the city of Bradford when Stephen was still young. His father worked as a taxi driver and his mother worked in a shop. The family lived in a small, ordinary house. From an early age, Stephen was a quiet and solitary child. He did not have many friends. He spent a lot of time alone in his room reading books. His parents often argued, and the home environment was tense. Stephen did not do well in school. He was intelligent but found it hard to concentrate and was often in trouble for not paying attention. He felt different from the other children and was sometimes bullied. When Stephen was a teenager, his behavior became more troubling. He developed a strong interest in violent topics. He read books about famous murderers and studied details of historical crimes. He began collecting knives. He started to get into fights at school. His parents were worried, but did not know how to help him. They took him to see doctors, but Stephen would not talk to them. At the age of 17, Stephen committed a serious act of violence. He walked into a local supermarket with a knife. Without saying a word or any provocation, he attacked the supermarket manager. He stabbed the man multiple times. The manager survived but was badly injured. Stephen was arrested by the police. In court, he showed no emotion about what he had done. Because of his age and a psychological report, he was sentenced to 3 years in a young offender institution, which is a prison for young people. While in custody, Stephen spoke to prison psychiatrists. He told them he believed he would become a murderer one day. He said he had fantasies about killing people. The doctors wrote reports warning that he was dangerous and fantasized about being a serial killer. In 1991, a doctor diagnosed him as having a schizoid personality disorder, meaning he was detached from social relationships and showed emotional coldness. They also said he had psychopathic traits. After his release, Stephen tried to live a normal life but struggled. In 1992, he threatened a young woman with a knife, holding it to her throat. He was arrested again and sentenced to 2 years in prison. After this, he decided to focus on his education. He believed that studying the minds of criminals would help him understand himself. He enrolled in college and was a good student when the topic interested him. He eventually went to university. Stephen Griffiths was admitted to the University of Bradford. He earned a degree in psychology. Later, in 2009, he was accepted to study for a PhD at the same university. His chosen subject was criminology, specifically the study of homicide. He lived alone in a small, rented flat in a building called Holmfield Court in the city center. His flat was messy and filled with books, many of them about murder, violence, and how to dismember a body. He had no job and lived on student grants. He spent his days studying, reading, and walking around the city. He kept to himself, and his neighbors thought he was odd and unfriendly. He was now a 40-year-old man living a very isolated life. He was intelligent and knowledgeable about crime, but he had no close relationships. The violent fantasies he had as a teenager had never gone away. He spent his time in the same area, where street sex workers often worked. Stephen Griffiths began to plan his crimes. He used his knowledge from his studies to think about how to commit murder without being caught. He decided to target sex workers, because he thought they were less likely to be reported missing quickly. He lived in a flat that was in an area where these women worked. His plan was to bring them back to his flat. His first victim was Susan Rushworth. Susan was 43 years old and worked as a sex worker to support herself. On June 22, 2009, Griffiths contacted Susan. He approached her on the street near his home. He offered to pay her for her services. Susan agreed and went with him to his flat at Holmfield Court. Once inside, Griffiths attacked and killed Susan. He then disposed of her body. He used methods he had read about to make sure her body would not be found. He cleaned his flat thoroughly afterward. Susan was reported missing, but the police did not find any leads. They treated it as a missing person case. For many months after that, Griffiths did nothing. He continued his studies and his normal routine. The police had no reason to connect him to Susan's disappearance. His second victim was Shelley Armitage. Shelley was 31 years old and also worked as a sex worker. On April 26, 2010, Griffiths saw Shelley in the same area. He used the same method. He approached her, offered money, and took her to his flat. He attacked and killed Shelley in his flat. After killing her, he dismembered her body. This means he cut her body into pieces. He placed the body parts into plastic bags. A few days later, he took the bags and threw them into the River Aire, which flows near Bradford. Shelley's friends reported her missing. The police began another missing person investigation, but again, they had no solid clues. Just a few weeks later, Griffiths targeted a third woman. Her name was Suzanne Blamires. Suzanne was 36 years old. On May 21, 2010, Griffiths met Suzanne on the street. He again offered her money and took her to his flat. He killed Suzanne in the same way. He then dismembered her body in his bathroom. He put her body parts into a suitcase. Later, he also disposed of parts of her body in the River Aire. However, this time, Griffiths made a mistake. The housing association that owned his building had installed a new CCTV system in the hallway. This was because the police had previously warned the housing association that Griffiths was a person of interest. The police had been watching him for 2 years, but did not have enough evidence to arrest him. The CCTV camera recorded Griffiths on May 23rd. The video showed him carrying a black suitcase out of his flat. It also showed him later carrying cleaning supplies into the flat. This video was saved on the system, but no one watched it immediately. Then on May 25th, a man who was fishing in the River Aire near Shipley found a human leg in the water. He called the police. The police searched the river and found more human body parts. They quickly identified the remains as belonging to Suzanne Blamires because of distinctive tattoos. The police now had a murder case. They checked missing person reports and connected Suzanne to Shelley Armitage and Susan Rushworth, as all three were missing sex workers from the same area. The police went to the last known area where Suzanne was seen. They reviewed CCTV footage from streets and businesses. This led them to the Holmfield Court apartment building. They asked the housing association for the CCTV footage from inside the building. The housing association gave them the tape from the hallway camera. The police watched the tape and saw Stephen Griffiths with the suitcase. This gave them a strong reason to arrest him. On May 24th, before the body was found, Suzanne's friends had reported her missing. They told police about a client she had talked about who lived in Holmfield Court. This information matched the CCTV evidence. On the evening of May 24th, police officers went to Griffiths' flat to arrest him on suspicion of Suzanne's murder. When the police officers arrived at Stephen Griffiths' flat on the evening of May 24th, 2010, he opened the door and calmly let them in. He was immediately arrested on suspicion of the murder of Susan Blamires. The officers began to search his apartment. The flat was very clean, which seemed unusual. In the bathroom, forensic experts used a special chemical that lights up when it touches blood, even if the blood has been cleaned. The walls, ceiling, and floor of the bathroom glowed, showing that a very violent event had happened there. In the kitchen, they found a crossbow and knives. They also took his computer. While Griffiths was in a police cell, detectives interviewed him. He was very calm and clear. He told the police he was a serial killer. He not only confessed to killing Susan Blamires, but also to killing Shelley Armitage and Susan Rushworth. He described how he killed them and how he dismembered the bodies of Shelley and Suzanne. He told police he threw body parts into the River Aire. He also claimed he had killed 2 more women, but he did not give their names. The police searched the river again with divers and found more remains, which were later identified as belonging to Shelley Armitage. The remains of Susan Rushworth were never found. The police case was very strong. They had Griffiths's full confession on video. They had the CCTV footage of him leaving his flat with a suitcase after Susan Blamires was killed. The forensic evidence from his bathroom proved that someone had been dismembered there. His computer search history showed he had been looking at websites about murder and body disposal. The police also learned that for 2 years before the murders, they had been watching Griffiths because of his strange behavior and interest in violence. They had even taken some weapons from him earlier, but they did not have enough evidence to stop him before he killed. Stephen Griffiths was charged with the murders of all 3 women. When he first appeared in court, he told the judge to call him the Crossbow Cannibal. He was held in prison until his trial. On December 21, 2010, at Leeds Crown Court, Griffiths changed his plea to guilty for all 3 murders. This meant he admitted in court that he did the crimes. Because he pleaded guilty, there was no need for a long trial with a jury. The judge, Mr. Justice Openshaw, sentenced Griffiths to life in prison. He gave him a whole life order. This is a special sentence in the UK, which means he will never be released from prison. He will spend the rest of his life behind bars. The judge said the murders were calculated, cruel, and involved the destruction of the victims' bodies. After the sentencing, the police revealed that Griffiths had a long history of violence and that psychiatrists had warned he was dangerous. In prison, Griffiths has tried to kill himself several times. In 2011, he went on a hunger strike for 120 days. He stays alone in his prison cell and avoids contact with other people. The families of Susan, Shelley, and Suzanne could finally know what happened to their loved ones. They made statements about their grief and loss. The police continued to investigate Griffiths's claim that he killed 2 more women, but without his cooperation, these cases remain unsolved. The city of Bradford was deeply affected by the crimes, and it led to discussions about how to better protect vulnerable people. Stephen Sean Griffiths remains in a high-security prison where he will die. Story 2. Derek Todd Lee was born in St. Francisville, Louisiana. His mother, Florence, was 17 years old when he was born. His biological father, Samuel, was not married to Florence. Samuel had many mental health problems, including schizophrenia. He left the family when Derek was a child and was often violent. Florence later married a man named Coleman Barrow. Coleman helped raise Derek and his older sister. The family lived in a mostly black area called Independence. Derek's mother was very strict and had a bad temper. She did not let the children play inside the house. Because of this, Derek spent most of his time outside with his cousins, uncles, and his grandfather. He was very close to them. From a young age, Derek was a restless child. People said he was hyperactive. When he was 9 years old, he started doing something strange. He would stand very still and watch people for a long time. This made his neighbors uncomfortable. He liked bird watching, but he also started peeping into windows. He would look through the windows of his female cousins and his sister. He did this to watch them without their knowledge. Derek had some childhood habits that lasted a long time. He wet his bed until he was a teenager. He also sucked his thumb until he was in high school. In school, he was in special education classes. He also went to speech therapy. He was bullied by other students for being in special education. He sometimes got into fights at school. He did not finish high school and dropped out in the 11th grade. As a young adult, Derek started dating a woman named Jacqueline, who was called Jackie. In 1987, they moved to Zachary, Louisiana. Derek got a job as a pipe fitter, which is a construction job that works with pipes. He and Jackie got married in 1988. Later that year, they had a son named Derek Todd Lee Jr. After their son was born, Derek and his wife grew apart. Derek started staying away from home for days at a time. He went to bars and Bible studies. He met other women and had sex with them. In 1990, during an argument, he twisted his wife's arm and forced her out of their house. She got a legal order to keep him away from her. They had a daughter in 1992, but Derek left the family again soon after she was born. His wife asked the court for help because he did not support the family financially. Derek came back for a short time, but began physically abusing her again in 1993. He then went to prison for burglary and did not contact his family for over 2 years. In 1996, Derek's father-in-law died in an accident at work. Derek's wife received a large amount of money, $250,000, from a settlement. Derek took control of this money. He spent it on expensive cars, clothes, jewelry, and alcohol. He also used some money to buy a house and land. He lost over $5,000 gambling at a casino. Around 1997, he began a long-term affair with another woman named Cassandra Green. They had a child together in 1999. By 2002, Derek and his wife had no money left and owed $85,000, so they declared bankruptcy. Derek had many problems with the law from a young age. At age 13, he was arrested for breaking into a candy store. At 16, he was arrested for trying to stab another teenager, but the case did not go to court. In 1986, a relative reported him to the police for peeping through windows. In 1988, he was convicted for entering someone's home without permission. In the early 1990s, he was arrested for being inside a locked home where a man lived with his 2 daughters. In 1993, he was identified as the person who likely cut 2 teenagers with a blade at a cemetery. In July 1993, he was sent to prison for 4 years for burglary. He was released in July 1995. 2 months later, he was arrested again for being a peeping Tom. He got probation. Soon after, he was arrested for stealing clothes from donation boxes. The charges were reduced to smaller crimes. In 1997, he was arrested again for prowling and peeping around a woman's house in Zachary. In 1999, he began following a 36-year-old woman named Colette Walker. He saw her at her job and then approached her in a parking lot near her home. He asked her for a date and for a ride, but she said no. 2 days later, he followed her into her apartment and would not leave until she gave him a fake phone number. He touched things in her home while he was there. In 2002, he followed a woman in another town and tried to grab her arm while touching himself under his clothes. This part of the story begins where part 1 ended, in the year 2002. Derek Todd Lee's pattern of peeping and harassment escalated into a series of violent attacks. He began to commit murders. The first known murder happened years earlier, on the night of April 18, 1998. Lee had been laid off from his job 2 days before. He got into an argument with his girlfriend at a bar called Liz's Lounge. He left the bar and drove to the home of a 28-year-old woman named Randy Mabrewer in Zachary. He had watched her house before during his nighttime peeping. Lee broke into her bedroom. He attacked her, causing severe bleeding. After she was incapacitated, he dragged her to her driveway, where he raped her. He then took her body, her keys, and a set of dumbbells. Randy Mabrewer and her body were never found. Her ex-husband found their young son alone in the house the next morning and reported her missing. The police considered the ex-husband the main suspect for a long time, but had no evidence to charge him. On September 23, 2001, Lee killed a 41-year-old woman named Gina Wilson Green in her home in Baton Rouge. Green had been worried about her safety and kept pepper spray by her windows. Lee entered her home, raped her, and strangled her to death. He undressed her in the kitchen and then placed her body on her bed. Her cell phone was found weeks later in a trash can in an alley nearby. This murder caused fear near the university campus. The police questioned her ex-husband and a painter she had argued with, but they did not connect this crime to Randy Mabreur's disappearance at the time. Lee killed again on January 14, 2002. A 21-year-old woman named Geraldine Bardesotto was in her home in Addis. Lee had been fired from a job 4 days earlier. He went to her door and asked to use her phone. When she let him in, he hit her in the head from behind with the telephone. She ran to her bedroom and grabbed her husband's shotgun, but it was not loaded. Lee wrestled the gun away from her. She ran for the back door, but Lee caught her. He stabbed her many times in the back and chest with a hunting knife. He also slit her throat. After she was dead, he stomped on her body before leaving. Her husband found her and, in his shock, touched the gun and got blood on himself, which made the police suspect him at first. On May 31, 2002, Lee attacked 22-year-old Charlotte Murray Pace in her new apartment in Baton Rouge. She had just graduated from university. Her roommates were away. Lee broke in, raped her, and stabbed her 81 times with a screwdriver during a long struggle. Police connected this murder to Gina Green's because the two women had lived near each other and jogged in the same park. Lee attempted another murder on July 9, 2002. He went to the home of 46-year-old Diane Alexander in Breaux Bridge. He knocked on her door and lied, saying he was doing construction for a neighbor and needed help finding an address. She did not let him inside, but handed him a cordless phone and phone book through the slightly open door. While outside, he kept asking to speak to her husband. She finally said her husband was not home. When she stepped out to get the phone back, Lee forced his way inside. He choked her, showed her a knife, and forced her to the floor. He set the knife down. Alexander grabbed the knife, but Lee took it back. He cut an electrical cord and wrapped it around her neck. He tried to rape her but could not. He then beat her severely in the face and stomped on her stomach. At that moment, Alexander's adult son came home. Lee ran out the back door to his car. He took the knife, the cut cord, and Alexander's purse with him. Before passing out, Alexander called for help. Her son tried to follow Lee's car. Alexander survived after spending days in the hospital. She and her son were able to describe Lee and his car, a gold Mitsubishi Mirage with damage on the front. Just 3 days later, on July 12, 2002, Lee kidnapped 44-year-old Pamela Kinnamore from her home in Baton Rouge. He walked in through her unlocked front door while she was taking a bath. He beat her, tied her up, and put her in his truck. He drove her to a remote area called Whiskey Bay. There, he raped her and slit her throat so deeply she was almost beheaded. 2 different drivers on the highway saw a woman who looked distressed in Lee's truck. One driver wrote down his license plate number. The other reported it by radio. Police found a small sperm sample on the body, but it was not enough for a full DNA test. Lee took a silver toe ring from Kinnamore's body and later gave it to his wife as a gift. Lee killed 23-year-old Dean Collum on November 21, 2002. He kidnapped her from her home in Lafayette. He drove her to a remote area, raped her, and beat her to death. A hunter found her body in the woods 3 days later. His last known murder was on March 3, 2003. He kidnapped 26-year-old Carrie Yoder from her home in Baton Rouge. He raped her, beat her, and strangled her. He dumped her body at Whiskey Bay, where it was found 10 days later. In these attacks, Lee often took the victim's cell phone. He rarely forced entry, often talking his way inside or finding unlocked doors. He sometimes pretended to be a homeless man named Anthony, asking for help. Most of his victims were white women, though Diane Alexander and Dean Collum were black women. The police investigating the murders in Baton Rouge had DNA evidence from several crime scenes, but for a long time, they were looking for the wrong person. An early FBI profile suggested the killer was white. Because of this, the police collected DNA samples from thousands of white men in the area, but found no match. This changed when a company called DNA Print Genomics analyzed the killer's DNA from the crime scenes. Their report stated the DNA came from a person with mostly African ancestry. This meant the killer was likely a black man, not a white man. This new information changed the direction of the police investigation. Around the same time, the police released a sketch of the suspect based on the description given by Diane Alexander, the woman who survived the attack in Breaux Bridge. Police in the town of Zachary saw the sketch. They recognized the man as Derek Todd Lee from previous Peeping Tom reports they had on file. The Zachary police contacted the Baton Rouge police and gave them Lee's name. They also mentioned they had a DNA sample from Lee, taken months earlier during a separate police matter. The crime lab compared Lee's DNA sample to the DNA from the murders. It was a match. This confirmed Derek Todd Lee was the serial killer. By this time, Lee had already fled Louisiana. On May 10, 2003, after police asked him for a voluntary DNA sample, he seemed to realize he was a suspect. He took his children out of school and sent his wife and children to Detroit. He then traveled by bus through several states. A nationwide manhunt began. Lee's information was featured on the television show America's Most Wanted. On May 27, 2003, after a 5-day search, law enforcement officers found him hiding at a motel in Atlanta, Georgia. He was arrested without incident. He agreed to return to Louisiana to face charges. Lee was charged with 5 counts of murder. His first trial was in August 2004 for the murder of Jerlyn DeSoto. The district attorney chose to try him for second-degree murder instead of first-degree murder because DeSoto was not sexually assaulted, making a first-degree conviction harder to secure. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His second trial was for the rape and murder of Charlotte Murray Pace. On October 14, 2004, he was convicted of first-degree murder. For this crime, he was sentenced to death by lethal injection. The Louisiana Supreme Court upheld this death sentence in 2008. He was placed on death row at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. While in prison, Lee was also a suspect in other unsolved murders and disappearances, but he was never formally charged with those crimes. On January 21, 2016, Derek Todd Lee died in a hospital from heart disease while still in state custody. After the crimes, the surviving victim, Diane Alexander, sought the $100,000 reward that had been offered for information leading to the killer's arrest. The organization offering the reward, Lafayette Crime Stoppers Incorporated, refused to pay her. They said she did not contact their tip line before the reward deadline and did not follow their specific rules. Alexander sued the organization, but the court ruled in favor of Lafayette Crime Stoppers Incorporated, and she did not receive the money. In November 2018, Lee's son, Dedrick Lee, was arrested for negligent homicide after accidentally shooting a teenager at his home. He was convicted and released from jail in August 2019. The series of murders, which had terrified the Baton Rouge area for years, was finally closed with the death of the perpetrator. Story 3. Anthony Edward Sowell was born in 1959 in East Cleveland, Ohio. He grew up in a very crowded and poor home. His mother, Claudia, raised her 7 children by herself. Later, after Sowell's sister died, Her 7 children also moved into the same small house. This meant many people lived together in a small space. Life at home was hard and violent. Sol's mother was known to be very strict and physically abusive. She would hit the children with objects like electrical cords. The children in the house saw and experienced this violence regularly. It was a normal part of their daily life. As a young boy, Sol did not do well in school. He was often quiet and kept to himself. He did not have many friends. He left school without finishing his education. During his teenage years, he did not have a job or any clear direction for his future. When Sol was 18 years old, he decided to join the United States Marine Corps. This was in 1978. The military gave him a structure and a job. He was trained to be an electrician. He served for 7 years and was stationed in different places, including Japan and California. His military records show he received some awards for good behavior during his service. However, near the end of his time in the Marines, Sol got into trouble. He was punished for bad conduct. The specific reason for this punishment is not detailed in his early life records, but it showed a change in his behavior. He left the Marines in 1985. After returning to Cleveland, Sol lived a mostly quiet life for a few years. He did not hold a steady job for long periods. He had relationships with women, but these relationships did not last. People who knew him then said he could be pleasant, but also seemed lonely and isolated. In 1989, an important event happened. A woman he knew accused him of a violent attack. She said he tied her up, choked her, and raped her. She was pregnant at the time. The police arrested Sol. In 1990, he went to court. He agreed to plead guilty to the charge of attempted rape. Because of this guilty plea, he was sent to prison. Anthony Sol remained in prison for 15 years. He was released in 2005. He was now 46 years old. He moved into a small, old house on Imperial Avenue in Cleveland. He lived alone. He got a job at a factory for a short time, but then he stopped working. He collected money from the government for unemployed people. He also collected scrap metal to sell for extra cash. His neighbors knew him as a quiet man who mostly stayed inside his house. After his release from prison in 2005, Anthony Sol lived alone in a house on Imperial Avenue in Cleveland. He began to commit crimes again, but for a long time, no one knew. Sol's method was to approach women in his neighborhood. Many of these women had difficult lives. Some struggled with drug addiction. Some did not have stable homes. Sol would speak to them in a friendly way. He would offer them alcohol or drugs. He would invite them back to his house. He said they could relax and spend time together. The women agreed because they saw him as a friendly man offering companionship. Once a woman was inside his house, Sol would attack her. His method was always similar. He would wait until the woman was distracted or under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Then, he would become violent very quickly. He would choke the woman with his hands. He strangled them. This is called manual strangulation. Sometimes he used items like ropes or cords to tie them up. He did this to overpower them and to stop them from screaming or fighting back. After he strangled a woman, she would die. Sol then had a dead body in his house. He needed to hide the body so no one would find it. He did this in different ways. He carried some bodies to the 3rd floor of his house. He put them in empty spaces behind walls or in corners. He carried other bodies down to the basement. He buried them in shallow graves dug into the dirt floor. He put one body in the backyard of the house. He placed a human skull inside a plastic bucket. Sol killed 11 women in this way, inside his home, between the years 2007 and 2009. The first known victim was a woman named Crystal Dozier, who went with him in 2007. The last known victim was a woman named Diane Turner, who went with him in late September of 2009. Most of the women were in their 40s or 50s. One was 25 years old. Many were mothers. Their families reported some of them missing to the police, but the police did not connect these missing persons reports to Sowell at the time. During these years, people who lived near Sowell's house started to notice a very bad smell. The smell came from his property. Neighbors complained to the city health department about the terrible odor. They thought it might be from a dead animal or from the nearby sausage factory. Sowell also had a girlfriend for a period of time. She later said she smelled a horrible smell in the house, like rotting bodies. Sowell told her the smell was from his old stepmother or from the factory next door. She believed him and stopped visiting the house. Sowell also attacked at least 3 other women during this time who survived. He used the same method. He invited them to his house. He gave them drugs or alcohol. Then he attacked them, choking and raping them. These women managed to escape alive. One woman, Latundra Billups, was attacked by Sowell in September 2009. After she escaped, she went to the police. She told them Sowell had raped and tried to strangle her. This report finally made the police act. On October 29, 2009, police officers went to Sowell's house on Imperial Avenue. They had a warrant for his arrest for the attack on Latundra Billups. Sowell was not home. When the officers went inside, the smell was overwhelming. They began to search the house. In the living room, they found the plastic bucket with a human skull inside. They then found more remains buried in the basement and hidden on the 3rd floor. They realized a serial killer had been living there. On October 29, 2009, police entered Anthony Sowell's house to arrest him for the attack on Latundra Billups. The terrible smell immediately made them suspect death. Officers found a human skull in a bucket in the living room. This discovery triggered a major crime scene investigation. Police sealed off the house and the yard. A large team of detectives and forensic experts began a careful search. The search of the house took many days. In the basement, detectives found shallow graves in the dirt floor. They dug up several bodies buried there. On the 3rd floor, they found more bodies hidden in crawl spaces and behind walls. In the backyard, they dug and found more remains. In total, they found the bodies or remains of 11 different women. The medical examiner determined most of the women had been killed by strangulation. Some had signs of being tied up. 2 days after the search began, on October 31, 2009, the police found Anthony Sowell. He was hiding at a house of a friend or an acquaintance. The police arrested him without a fight. He was taken to jail and held on a very high bail of $5 million. This was to ensure he could not get out. The police then worked to identify the 11 victims. This was a slow process using dental records and DNA testing. They released the names to the public as they were confirmed. All the victims were African American women. Most were from the Cleveland area. Detectives also connected Sowell to the 3 surviving women who said he had attacked them. The evidence against him was very strong. It included the bodies in his home, the matching stories of the survivors, and forensic evidence. Anthony Sowell's trial began in June 2011. He was charged with many crimes, including 11 counts of murder and many counts of rape and kidnapping. At first, his lawyers said he was not guilty by reason of insanity. This means they argued he was mentally ill and did not know his actions were wrong. Later, Sowell changed his plea to simply not guilty. The trial lasted several weeks. The prosecutors showed the jury all the evidence from his house and the testimony from the survivors. The jury did not believe the insanity argument. On July 22, 2011, the jury found Anthony Sowell guilty on all charges except 2 minor ones. A separate hearing was then held to decide his punishment. The jury recommended that he receive the death penalty for the murders. On August 12, 2011, the judge agreed with the jury and sentenced Anthony Sowell to death. After the sentence, Sowell's lawyers began a long process of appeals. They argued he did not get a fair trial because of too much news coverage. They also argued his original lawyers did a bad job. These appeals went to higher courts in Ohio and eventually to the U.S. Supreme Court. Every court reviewed the case and agreed the trial was fair. All appeals were denied. His death sentence was upheld. While on death row, Anthony Sowell became ill. In January 2021, he was moved from prison to a prison hospital for end-of-life care. He died at the hospital on February 8, 2021, from a terminal illness before the state could carry out the execution. The city of Cleveland tore down Sowell's old house in 2011. The empty lot remained for years. In 2021, a memorial called the Garden of 11 Angels was built on the land to honor the victims. The survivors of his attacks and the families of the murdered women continue to live with the impact of his crimes. The story of the Cleveland murders is now closed. Story 4. Robert William Pickton was born on October 24, 1949, in Port Coquitlam, British Columbia. His parents, Leonard and Louise Pickton, owned and operated a pig farm. The family lived on the farm at 953 Dominion Avenue. Robert had an older sister named Linda and a younger brother named David. When Linda was young, their parents sent her to live with relatives in Vancouver. They believed a pig farm was not a good place to raise a girl. So Robert grew up on the farm with his brother David. From a very early age, Robert and David were made to work on the farm. Their mother, Louise, was a strict and demanding person. She forced her sons to work long hours looking after the pigs. She cared more about the animals than about her sons' cleanliness. The boys often went to school wearing dirty clothes that smelled like pig manure. Because of this, other children at school gave them the nickname Stinky Piggy. Robert did not do well in school. He failed grade 2 and was placed into a special education class. When Robert was 12 years old, he was given a calf to raise. He became very attached to the animal and treated it as a pet. After 2 weeks, he came home from school and could not find the calf. He looked in the barn and discovered his parents had slaughtered the calf for meat. This event upset Robert deeply. Robert left school in 1963 when he was a teenager. He got a job as a meat cutter, working in a butcher shop. He did this job for almost 7 years. Then, he left to work full-time on his family's pig farm. His father, Leonard, was an angry and abusive man. Robert was not close to his father, but he was strongly attached to his mother. Robert's father died in 1978. His mother died in 1979. After their parents were gone, Robert and his siblings inherited the pig farm and the land it was on. The area around Port Coquitlam was growing. Developers wanted to build houses. Robert and his family sold parts of the farm property to these developers. They received over $5 million from these sales. In March of 1997, an event happened involving Robert Pickton. A sex worker named Wendy Lynn Eistetter went to his farm. She and Pickton got into a fight. Eistetter later told police that Pickton handcuffed her and stabbed her 4 times. She managed to get away from him, took the weapon, and stabbed him back. Both Pickton and Eistetter went to different hospitals for their injuries. The police charged Pickton with attempted murder. He was released after paying a bond. In January 1998, the court stopped the charge. The prosecutors decided that Eistetter, who had problems with drugs, was not a stable witness. They felt they could not win the case with her testimony. With the money from selling the land, Robert Pickton and his brother David started hosting large parties on their farm. They built a place for parties inside a large old slaughterhouse building. They called this place Piggy's Palace. It was like a nightclub. These parties became very popular. Sometimes up to 2,000 people came. The people who came included business people, local politicians, and members of the Hells Angels motorcycle gang. The city officials in Port Coquitlam were not happy about these parties. The farmland was supposed to be used for agriculture, not for a nightclub. The city sued the Picton brothers for breaking the zoning rules. To try to make the parties legal, the Picton brothers created a non-profit charity called the Piggy Palace Good Times Society in 1996. They said the charity was for holding events for sports groups and other community organizations. The city kept trying to stop the parties. The brothers held a New Year's Eve party even after being told not to. Because of this, a judge gave an order banning any more parties. The government also removed the charity's status because the brothers did not submit the required financial reports. The charity was shut down. During the time Robert Picton was hosting parties at Piggy's Palace, women began disappearing from the downtown east side of Vancouver. This was a poor area of the city. Many of the missing women were involved in sex work and struggled with drug addiction. By the late 1990s, the number of missing women was growing. People in the community and the media began to suspect a serial killer might be responsible. Robert Picton continued to live and work on his pig farm. In 1997, after the attempted murder charge involving Wendy Lynn Eistada was dropped, Picton's behavior continued. He often spent time in the downtown east side. He would approach women, offering them money to come with him to his farm. Picton developed a method to bring women to the farm without raising suspicion. He used his pickup truck. He would meet women, talk to them, and offer them a large sum of money, sometimes $100 or $200 for sex work. He would say they had to go to his farm to get the money. The promise of quick cash was effective, as many of the women were desperate. Once a woman agreed to go with him, Picton would drive her to the remote farm in Port Coquitlam. The farm was secluded, with many buildings and a large slaughterhouse. He would take the women into his trailer home or into the slaughterhouse. He then used handcuffs to restrain them. He used the same pair of fur-lined handcuffs on multiple victims. Picton killed the women in his trailer or in the slaughterhouse. The method was often strangulation. He sometimes used a knife or other weapons. After killing them, he needed to dispose of the bodies. He used his skills as a former meat cutter and pig farmer. He had equipment for butchering animals. Evidence would later show he used a .22 caliber revolver in some of the killings. He had attached a sexual toy to the barrel of the gun, claiming it was to silence the sound, though this would not work well. Picton disposed of the bodies by using a rendering machine. This is an industrial machine that grinds meat and bone into small pieces. He put the bodies of his victims through this machine. He also had pigs on his farm. It is believed he fed remains of the women to his pigs. In some cases, he mixed human remains with pork from his pigs. He sometimes gave this meat to friends or may have sold it. The victims were women from Vancouver's downtown east side. They included Serena Abotsway, Mona Wilson, Andrea Josbury, Brenda Wolfe, Georgina Papine, and Marnie Fry. They were all reported missing by friends or family between 1997 and 2001. Their disappearances were not solved quickly. Because the women were marginalized, their cases were not always treated as urgent by the police initially. In 1998, an employee working on Picton's farm found something strange. The employee found several purses and identification cards belonging to women. The employee knew these women were reported missing from the downtown east side. The employee reported this finding to the police. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, RCMP, searched the farm 3 times. They did not find enough evidence to charge Picton at that time. In June 1999, the police received an important tip. A person told the police that Robert Picton had a freezer full of human meat at his farmhouse. This information was specific and alarming. However, the police did not act on this tip. They did not get a warrant to search the freezer. The tip was filed away and not followed up. Robert Picton continued to kill for years without being caught. He felt safe on his isolated farm. He believed his methods of disposing of bodies left no evidence. He kept personal items like identification and clothing from some of his victims as trophies. He stored these items in his workshop or in his trailer. The investigation that finally caught Robert Pickton began on February 6, 2002. It started for a different reason. The police had a warrant to search the Pickton farm for illegal firearms. When officers arrived, they arrested Robert Pickton and his brother David on weapons charges. While on the property for the gun search, the police saw things that made them suspicious. They saw personal items that did not belong there. Based on what they saw, the police got a second warrant. This new warrant was part of the larger missing women investigation. The farm was sealed off as a crime scene. The next day, February 7th, Robert Pickton was formally charged with the weapons offenses and then released. The police began to watch him closely. They put him under surveillance. Meanwhile, forensic teams started the huge job of searching the farm. The property was very large, covering many acres. It had a trailer home, a slaughterhouse, workshops, and many other buildings. The search teams found evidence quickly. They found the identification cards and personal belongings of missing women. They found clothing and jewelry. On February 22, 2002, just over 2 weeks after the first search, the police arrested Robert Pickton again. This time, they charged him with 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Serena Abotsway and Mona Wilson. In the following months, more murder charges were added. By the end of May 2005, Robert Pickton was charged with a total of 27 murders. The search of the farm became one of the biggest forensic investigations in Canadian history. Police and anthropologists dug up large parts of the land. They used heavy machinery, conveyor belts, and special sifters to go through the soil. They were looking for small pieces of bone or teeth. The work was difficult because Pickton had used a rendering machine. He had also fed remains to pigs. The investigation cost about $70 million. During the search, forensic experts tested many items. They tested the clothes Robert Pickton was wearing during the 1997 attack on Wendy Lynn Eisteter. These clothes had been stored in a police locker. New tests found the DNA of 2 missing women, Andrea Borhaven and Cara Ellis, on those clothes. This linked Pickton to those victims. Robert Pickton's trial began on January 30, 2006. He pleaded not guilty to all 27 counts of first-degree murder. The judge decided that trying all 27 murders at once would be too complex for one jury. He split the charges into 2 groups. The trial would proceed on 6 counts first. The trial for the other 20 charges would happen later. The trial for the 6 murders started in January 2007. The jury heard many details. The prosecution showed a video of Pickton's friend, Scott Chubb. In the video, Chubb said Pickton told him a good way to kill a drug addict was to inject them with windshield washer fluid. Another witness, Andrew Bellwood, said Pickton told him he killed sex workers by handcuffing them, strangling them, and then feeding their bodies to pigs. Police showed the jury a .22 caliber revolver found in Pickton's trailer. It had a sexual toy attached to its barrel. Pickton had claimed this was to silence the gun. On December 9, 2007, the jury gave its verdict. They found Robert Pickton not guilty of first-degree murder for the 6 women. However, they found him guilty of the lesser charge of second-degree murder for all 6. On December 11th, the judge sentenced Pickton to life in prison with no chance of parole for 25 years. This was the maximum sentence for second-degree murder. After the trial, the prosecution decided not to proceed with the remaining 20 murder charges. They stated that since Pickton was already serving a life sentence with no parole for 25 years, more convictions would not change his sentence. The families of the victims were upset that Pickton would not be tried for the other murders. The police investigations were later reviewed. A public inquiry found that the police made many mistakes. They did not follow up on tips quickly. They did not take the disappearances of marginalized women seriously for many years. In 2010, a deputy police chief publicly apologized to the victims' families. He said he was sorry the police did not catch Pickton sooner. In 2013, some children of the victims sued the Vancouver police and the federal police. They argued the police failed to protect their mothers. This lawsuit was settled in 2014. Each child received $50,000. The police did not admit they were legally at fault. Robert Pickton appealed his convictions all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. The Supreme Court rejected his final appeal on July 30th, 2010. His convictions stood. Pickton was sent to a maximum security prison in British Columbia. In June 2018, he was moved to a prison in Quebec called Port Cartier Institution. On May 19, 2024, another inmate attacked Pickton in prison. The inmate used a broken broom handle. Pickton was badly injured and put on life support in a hospital. He died from his injuries on May 31, 2024. In July 2025, the inmate who attacked him, Martin Charret, was charged with first-degree murder for Pickton's death. Robert Pickton died in a prison hospital, never having been released from his life sentence for the murder of 6 women. Story 5. Marc Dutroux was born on November 6, 1956, in Ixelles, a part of Brussels, Belgium. He was the first child of Victor Dutroux and Janine Lons. He would later have 4 younger brothers and sisters. When Marc was very young, his father got a job as a teacher in Africa, in a country called Burundi. The whole family moved there. They lived in Burundi until it became independent in 1962. Then, the Dutroux family moved back to Belgium. Back in Belgium, the family settled in a small, quiet village named Obéix in the region of Hainaut. Marc grew up there. As a teenager, his family life changed. His parents' marriage had problems. In 1972, when Marc was 16 years old, his parents separated. His father moved out of the family home. After finishing his school studies, Marc Dutroux decided to leave home as well. He needed a way to earn money. He trained to become an electrician. For a while, he worked fixing electrical systems. This was his first proper job. In 1976, when Marc was 20 years old, he married a woman named Françoise Dubois. They started a life together and had 2 children. However, their marriage was not happy. People who knew them said Marc was abusive towards his wife and family. The marriage did not last. In 1983, after 7 years, Marc and Françoise divorced. The court decided that Françoise would keep custody of their 2 children. After his divorce, Marc Dutroux changed his work. He stopped being an electrician and began working as a scrap metal dealer. This job involved buying and selling old metal. He also started making money in another way, by stealing car parts and selling them. This was his first step into criminal activity. During this time, he had a habit of visiting public ice skating rinks in several towns near his home. He would go to rinks in Charleroi, Forest, and Montigny-sur-Sambre. At these rinks, he would act in a strange way. He would deliberately bump into young girls who were skating or trip near them. This was his way to touch them or start an interaction. In October 1980, at the Charleroi rink, he bumped into a man's girlfriend many times. The man, named Armand Debain, got into a fight with Marc because of this. The police were called. A court case happened later. The court found Armand Debain guilty of assault for fighting, but they also banned Marc Dutroux from ever going back to that skating rink. Around this period, Marc began a relationship with a woman named Michelle Martin. She became his girlfriend. They would later have 3 children together. Marc continued his work as a scrap dealer, and his life continued in this way. Marc Dutroux's first proven crime happened on June 7, 1985. He kidnapped an 11-year-old girl named Sylvie D. He did not act alone. An accomplice named Jean Van Petegem helped him. Van Petegem was a friend who was living with Dutrix after leaving the military. Later that same year, on October 17th, Dutrix and Van Petegem kidnapped a 19-year-old woman named Maria V. from a town called Perons-les-Binches. Maria V. told police there was a third, older man involved, but this man was never found. On December 14th, 1985, Dutrix kidnapped a girl named Axel D. During this crime, his accomplice Van Petegem told the victim that they were part of a gang led by two men. Just 4 days later, on December 18th, Dutrix abducted a 15-year-old girl named Elizabeth G. He took her to a house and filmed her while she was naked. Then, on January 17, 1986, he kidnapped an 18-year-old woman named Catherine B. from his old home village of Obeix. For this crime, he had one or two different accomplices. The police were able to find clues linking Jean Van Petegem to the crimes because he had talked too much to the victims, giving information about himself. In early February 1986, the police arrested Marc Dutrix, Michel Martin, and Jean Van Petegem. Their trial took a long time. Finally, on April 26, 1989, they were convicted. Dutrix was found guilty of kidnapping and raping 5 girls, and also for a violent robbery of an elderly woman. The court sentenced him to 13.5 years in prison. Van Petegem got 6.5 years, and Michel Martin received a 5-year sentence. However, Marc Dutrix did not serve his full sentence. In 1992, the Belgian Minister of Justice, Melchior Wathelet, granted him an early release. Dutrix was let out of prison after serving only about 3 years. This happened even though the prosecutor and a prison psychiatrist had warned the government that Dutrix was still a very dangerous man. While he was in prison, Dutrix had tricked doctors. He convinced them he had serious mental problems and could not work. Because of this, the Belgian government began giving him disability money every month. He also convinced doctors to give him strong sedatives and sleeping pills, claiming he needed them. After his release, he used this government money to buy several old, small houses. He used 3 of these houses for his crimes. In one house, in the town of Marcinelle, he built a hidden room in the basement. This hidden room was like a prison cell, with a heavy door and no windows. People later called it a dungeon. His serious crimes began again in 1995. On June 24th, 2 8-year-old girls, Julie Lejeune and Melissa Russo, were walking in their neighborhood in Grace Holland. Dutrix kidnapped them and took them to his house in Marcinelle. He locked them in the hidden dungeon in the basement. He sexually abused them and filmed the abuse to make child pornography. About 2 months later, on August 23rd, Dutrix wanted more victims. In the early morning hours in the city of Ostend, he and a new accomplice, a drug addict named Michel Lelivre, saw 2 teenage girls. The girls and Marcel, 17, and Yves Lambrex, 19, were on holiday and walking back to where they were staying. Dutrix and Lelivre forced them into a vehicle and drove them back to the house in Marcinelle. Because the dungeon already held the 2 young girls, Dutrix chained in an Yves to a bed in a regular room. In September, Dutrix decided to kill Marcel and Yves Lambrex. He had another accomplice by then, a man named Bernard Weinstein. Dutrix drugged the 2 teenagers. Then, he and Weinstein took them to a different house that Dutrix owned in the town of Jumet. There, they wrapped the unconscious girls in plastic sheets and buried them in a hole under a shed in the garden. They were buried alive. In November 1995, Dutrix grew angry with his accomplice, Bernard Weinstein. He was afraid Weinstein would be caught by the police and would talk. Dutrix kidnapped Weinstein and held him in the dungeon in Marcinelle. During this time, he let Julie and Melissa out of the dungeon to walk around the house. He tortured Weinstein to find out where Weinstein hid his money. Then, He took Weinstein to another property he owned in Sars-la-Bessière. He drugged him, put him in a hole, and buried him alive, too. On December 6, 1995, Dutrix was arrested by police. However, this arrest was not for the kidnappings or murders. He was arrested because a witness recognized him stealing a car. He was sent to jail for this car theft. While Dutrix was in jail, the two young girls, Julie and Melissa, were still locked in the dungeon in his house. He had given instructions to his wife, Michelle Martin, to go downstairs and feed them. Michelle Martin later said she was too scared to go down into the basement. She did not feed them. The two girls died of starvation and thirst in the dark dungeon. Dutrix was released from jail on the car theft charge on March 20th, 1996. He went home and found the two girls dead. He later buried their bodies in the garden of his house in Sars-la-Bessière, near where he had buried Bernard Weinstein. Just 2 months later, Dutrix began kidnapping again. On May 28, 1996, he and Michel Lelièvre kidnapped a 12-year-old girl named Sabine Dardenne as she was riding her bicycle to school in Tournai. He locked her in the dungeon in Marcinelle, where he sexually abused her for many days. Then, on August 9, 1996, he and Lelièvre kidnapped a 14-year-old girl, Laetitia Delhez, as she left a swimming pool in Bertrix. An eyewitness saw the van used in this kidnapping and told police part of its license plate number. This clue finally led the police to Marc Dutrix. Following the tip from the eyewitness who saw the van, police arrested Marc Dutrix, his wife Michelle Martin, and his accomplice Michel Lelièvre on August 13, 1996. At first, a search of Dutrix's house in Marcinelle did not find the hidden dungeon. 2 days later, on August 15th, both Dutrix and Lelièvre began to confess to some of the kidnappings. That same day, Dutrix was taken to the house by police. He showed them the hidden door in the basement that led to the secret cell. Inside, police found and rescued Sabine Dardenne and Laetitia Delhez, who were still alive but had been abused and chained. After this rescue, Dutrix started giving more information to try and get a lesser punishment. On August 17th, he led police to another house he owned in Sars-la-Bessière. In the garden, police dug up the bodies of Julie Lejeune, Melissa Russo, and Bernard Weinstein. Then, on September 3rd, Dutrix led police to the house in Jumet. Under a shed in the garden, they found and dug up the bodies of Anmar Shell and Yves Lambrex. The police investigation now had proof of multiple murders. However, the police and justice system were heavily criticized for many mistakes. It was discovered that Dutrix's own mother had written a letter to the police in 1995, telling them she believed her son had kidnapped 2 girls and was keeping them in his house. The police had visited Dutrix's Marcinelle house twice in December 1995 while searching for Julie and Melissa. During those searches, officers reported hearing children's voices, but did not find the hidden cell. They believed Dutrix's excuse that the basement construction was for a new drain. Also, when Dutrix was first arrested in December 1995 for car theft, he was a main suspect in the missing girls case, but he was released months later without the hidden dungeon being found. Public anger grew when the lead investigating judge, Jean-Marc Connerat, was removed from the case in October 1996. He was removed because he had attended a charity dinner for the victims' families, which a court said made him seem less impartial. In response, over 300,000 Belgians marched in Brussels in a protest called the White March. They demanded a better investigation and changes to the police and justice systems. The case was also hampered by poor communication. 2 different police groups, the Gendarmerie and the Judicial Police, were both investigating, but did not share information with each other. Each group wanted to solve the case first. In April 1998, another major mistake happened. While Dutrix was in a courthouse being allowed to look at his own case files, he attacked the police officer guarding him. He stole the officer's gun and escaped from the building. He was captured a few hours later in a nearby forest, but this escape caused the Belgian Minister of Justice and the Minister of the Interior to resign from their jobs. The trial of Marc Dutroux and his accomplices finally began on March 1, 2004, in the city of Arlon. It was a trial by jury. Dutroux was tried for the murders of Anne Marchal, Yves Lambrechts, and Bernard Weinstein. He was also tried for the kidnappings and rape of 6 girls, including Sabine Dardenne and Laetitia Delhez. Michel Martin, Michel Lelivre, and a businessman named Michel Nihal were also on trial as accomplices. During the trial, Dutroux changed his story many times. He admitted to kidnapping and abusing the girls, but denied murdering Julie and Melissa. He said they starved because Michel Martin did not feed them. He claimed he was just a small part of a large network of criminals who trafficked children, but he gave no solid proof of this network. Michel Martin testified that she was too afraid of Dutroux to go into the dungeon to feed the girls. Michel Lelivre confessed to helping with the kidnappings. The jury deliberated for 3 days. On June 17, 2004, they found Marc Dutroux, Michel Martin, and Michel Lelivre guilty on all the main charges. Michel Nihal was found not guilty of kidnapping and murder, but was convicted on drug charges. On June 22, the judge sentenced Dutroux to life in prison with no possibility of parole for 30 years. Michel Martin was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Michel Lelivre was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Michel Nihal received a 5-year sentence for the drug crimes. After the trial, Michel Martin was released on parole in August 2012 after serving 16 years of her sentence. She went to live in a convent under strict conditions. Michel Lelivre was released on parole in October 2019. Marc Dutroux remains in prison. He applied for early release in 2013 and again in 2019. Before a parole hearing could happen, 3 independent psychiatrists evaluated him. They wrote a long report stating he was still a sadistic psychopath with no remorse and a very high risk of committing violent crimes again. Because of this report, Dutroux himself withdrew his request for parole in 2020. He will likely spend the rest of his life in a Belgian prison. Marc Dutroux remains in prison for life, and the scars of his crimes led to permanent changes in Belgian law and police cooperation.